What is the agenda of the global financial elite? It seems that last year and continuing into this year, certain mass events have transpired which have led to a vastly increased amount of central control over a wide variety of human activities. Small business has been stifled. Alternative media has been stifled. Theater, stand-up comics, local arts and culture has been stifled. Things are increasingly centralized. They're controlling information flows. Why would they want to do this? What could their end game be? Well, if you look at the UN agendas, they want far fewer people alive than are alive today. The target is about 500 million. They want carbon neutrality, which doesn't seem like a bad thing, but they want to control the distribution of land and resources centrally at a global scale, mitigate the risk of nuclear conflict, other sorts of weapons of mass destruction, and there is a geopolitical logic to that. You can't have rogue states threatening human existence in perpetuity, or eventually one of them will go off and the consequences might be extinction. So the drive for increased central control is logical, and the environmental concerns are also logical. We're on a planet of finite resources using an infinite growth economic paradigm that has to end somehow, and it can be a catastrophic end when things just stop working, when the supply lines shut down, or they can gradually ease off and control supply lines, wean supply lines of their oil and other natural resources, and only provide for those vital, essential needs. And the target population, well, if we continued consuming resources the way that we are today, if we continued polluting the way we are today, perhaps our current population would be too high. But there's also the kind of cold evolutionary calculation to perform on the elite incentives operating here. It's in their interest genetically to give the world to their offspring and to take the world away from the rest of us. So people don't like to think that, you know, this kind of cold evolutionary logic actually applies and actually motivates people. But in all of my observations, it certainly seems to. When it becomes possible for someone to leave a partner of perceived lower reproductive value, and attractiveness is a good proxy for fertility, and, you know, it'll be a proxy for how successful the offspring will be reproductively as well. When a partner is able to move up, generally they move up. When they have extra income, when they break into a new social market, they go for the best that they can get. And very few people are held back by the scruple of the commitment to another human individual and their needs and their emotions. We do instrumentalize each other in the interests of ultimately our reproduction. Maybe that's too much evolutionary psychology, and I don't know, is that a bias of people in these spheres? Perhaps to some extent, but it does seem to make sense that the behaviors that put a focus on genetic replication would be the behaviors that tend to win out in natural selection over the generations. And so those of us who are left are those of us who, in whatever way, consciously or unconsciously, directed our behaviors in the interest of our own genetic replication. So if the elites can replace us with robots and dumb us down with fake news and prevent us from recognizing that our own interests are being violated with propaganda about equal rights, climate change, whatever happens to work for that purpose, then why wouldn't they do it? And moreover, why wouldn't they, in the process, extract as much value from us as possible? Why wouldn't they put us in a situation where we effectively became slaves? If they could chip us and monitor us and track us and keep us subservient to them through a kind of medical tyranny, if they could control all of our information sources, if they could control our access to capital, if they could take money away from people who are a threat to the system, or who just don't obey, if they, exert all of these centralized technologies of control over the mass population to ensure that people work in their interest, why wouldn't they do that? Why wouldn't they enslave the global population? It sounds like conspiracy theorists talk, and who would ever do that? But then you think about human history, and everybody forever would do that. Everyone has practiced slavery. The elites in all nations, when possible, practiced slavery. It was immensely popular and profitable for them. So why wouldn't the current elite, if given the opportunity, if given the technological advantage, why wouldn't they position themselves to be the slave-owning class over the rest of us? It would serve their genetic interests, their financial interests, and they could lord over us and move as they please while we are chained to the land as serfs or chattel slaves. I don't see any reason why they would not go for that, except moral reasons. Now, there's the Christian morality, which might hold some of them back. The elite, the global elite, financial elite, are generally not Christians. And so there are some other moral dimensions they could be looking at. They could try to remain consistent with their principles. There's the attempt to avoid cognitive dissonance. No one likes thinking of themselves as an evil person. I think when they put forward, when most of them put forward ideals of climate change, carbon neutrality, protecting endangered species, protecting the environment, there is some kind of love for the earth there, right? Their deeper evolutionary drive to be the one who dictates where human beings settle and how, that's ultimately the implication of, climate engineering to preserve the environment. That deep down evolutionary instinct might encourage, that subconscious drive might encourage the conscious drive to love nature and feel these good feelings about squirrels and elks and stuff like that. So there is that kind of moral incentive. We don't want to be in contradiction with our avowed beliefs. So what other beliefs do they really hold to? Some kind of meritocracy? Well, if they can siphon off the top brain power from all over the world and not be racially discriminatory at all in that process, well, then why not create some kind of exclusive master society over the rest of us, and they can practice their liberal, egalitarian, meritocratic values in their own way and still forward their evolutionary interest. So people in the middle class, people who are rooted to a particular place, tend to put high emphasis on ethnic identities and the kind of spirit of a folk. In whatever way, whether it's rooting for a sports team, it's a middle class behavior, right? Rooting for a sports team where that kind of tribal instinct has been abstracted and reappropriated, or whether it's just crass nationalism, whatever it is. People in the upper echelons don't feel that way, and it doesn't make sense evolutionarily for them to feel that way. If you have an exclusive eugenic paradigm that regulated reproduction by virtue of social convention, like upper classes develop. They mediate reproduction through rituals, high-class institutions, elite institutions. They have all sorts of filters that go between candidates, reproductive candidates, and their daughters. So if you can rely on that eugenic framework, if it's robust, then racism is really not an adaptive behavior for you. Because even if a member of another race, that race may on average have lower IQ, shorter lifespans, lower impulse control, whatever it is, on average that race could have those attributes. And the individual even that you bring in may have many of those attributes, but they may also have some gene that means that their livers will function more effectively, or they're less likely to get cancer or whatever. Like, there's all sorts of genes that people have that may be advantageous. Take any two people, even if one is a specimen of health and the other looks like a degenerate, if you search through the whole genome, I'm sure there's going to be at least one mutation that would be more advantageous for its particular application in the current context. So if you think of genes in that way, if you can rely on your social institutions to provide a kind of selective mechanism, eugenic filter, then you want to farm genes from everyone you can. I think that's what the ruling elite have been doing since at least 9,500 BC. I would argue that is actually just in line with mainstream genetic and archaeological data. If you look at the spread of the Neolithic, well, that's why that basal Eurasian ghost population genetic cluster is called basal Eurasian, because it's everywhere. Because the same basic genetic cluster has been at the heart of a vast technological, cultural expansion for the last half of a great age, the last 12,000 years. I think it probably goes further back than that, but anyway, that is their incentive genetically, and in that case, they can be meritocratic, they can have some kind of egalitarian virtue, or they're not discriminatory, and if they myopically focus on certain classes of discrimination and forget about ideological discrimination, religious discrimination, and they think it's okay to, persecute Christians past a certain point. They think it's okay to persecute those who want to maintain some alternative kind of genetic vision, right? Not this kind of meritocratic, utilitarian maximalization of power strategy, which those on top tend to go for obvious reasons. That's what gets you on top. Say that you have some other aesthetic orientation, your vision of a people, your vision of a folk spirit, your vision of, how you want life to be, what human life means to you, actualizing that. They can discriminate against you on that basis and not think twice about it, because they don't value those things, and they value what they say they value. They don't have to be totally deceptive. There's a way that the logic of the progressive narrative, of the ideology of the ruling elite, they can maintain it and control the planet, control its resources, monopolize the planet for their own genetic progeny, and what exactly is holding them back from doing that? And if they can effectively enslave us and say that it's in the interest of the environment, it's in the interest of salvaging, and there is a kind of, I understand this aspect of it, where if just for physical reasons we can't maintain the kind of industrial economy we have, then they do have to go to this kind of slow burn and, ease off of this kind of accelerated capitalism. And the process of undoing that would be, not allowing free market processes to happen, which means you have to control the money that people are able to make in various ways. State control, interstate, international financial control, whatever mechanisms for doing this you use. It's some kind of socialism, some kind of centrally planned system. And with the the array of technologies they have for distributing the computing power involved in that, social credit currencies, cryptocurrencies, and the various internet, central banks are going for cryptocurrencies as the new model, as the new financial model. They can justify this and say, well, we're making the best of the situation. They don't think of themselves as evil, except for the actual demons among them. And I think that some of them understand full well the kind of occult mechanisms operating in the background here. And that's the other moral dimension. So there's the kind of exoteric morality that might hold them back from enslaving us. And I said that's not going to cut it. They would enslave us and feel just fine about it based on their own avowed values. So the other moral dimension is knowledge of karma and knowledge of the kind of principles underlying law of attraction and morphic resonance and the different kinds of shaping of trends, broadly speaking, it's ultimately all karmic in nature. It's all part of the same unified kind of dynamic of the evolution of soul through time. And they understand that if they replaced us with robots, then the planet would be occupied solely by them. And people who have explicitly taken that left-hand path, who have taken a Luciferian satanic path, they know that the world, those of them who are metaphysically literate know, who aren't just doing it for aesthetic reasons because it seems, rebellious or whatever. But high-level occult practitioners understand that if the planet was occupied by people of that strategy only, then they couldn't escape the consequence of creating their hell, right? The point is for them to become high-level demons, to parasite the energy of the good, and if they eliminate all the good people, all the lumpen proletariat, all the, the peasantry, then it's just them, and there's no spiritual energy to farm. Even if they have the robots to provide all of their physical needs, metaphysically speaking, there are all sorts of natural disasters that could come and strike a planet at any point, right? No power is ultimately invincible on this planet. You could have reversal of the poles, north and south poles. That could be catastrophic. There could be an electromagnetic pulse emitted from the sun, a big mass coronal ejection event. There could be, meteor impact. There could be all sorts of different things. Gamma ray burst. The sun could, all sorts of different stuff could mess up what they would have going here on this plane. So in order to avoid bad karma for the planet, you have to have good people here. So they're not going to allow us just to die off. They're not going to inherit the planet and kick us off of it. That's not their goal. That moral argument would actually lead them into favoring a slavery model. And they would keep these smart cities as soul farms to harness the positive karmic energy emitted by beings that are just trying to do their best and make it through the world. Which is a grim prospect, because that's how a hell, or a real hell, is born. And if they're able to make that leap, then that class of demons can maintain its position a very long time. Especially if it's led by high-level occult practitioners, and if those practitioners are in communion with demonic entities from other worlds, and they can create networks of cooperation between high-level occult practitioners. In one world, someone's called an high-level occult practitioner elite. In another world, they seem like a demon when you communicate with them. How does that work? I believe I outlined some of the mechanics underlying it in my metaphysical explanation videos, but people will call me out on sounding ridiculous, but ultimately, you don't know what you're talking about. People don't understand metaphysics. They don't understand many of these, esoteric subjects and history and different things, and something sounds like it's counterintuitive or against the mainstream narrative they've heard, and they want to make fun of it. So make fun of it if you want. You can have networks of demonic beings through different worlds coordinating and constructing large-scale hell dimensions, and there's all sorts of different paths for trying to avoid the ultimate karmic consequences of that. And it's the path of seeking immortality. And it's reflected in myth, obviously. The king the emperor who wants power so much that they're willing to sacrifice their family, sacrifice their nation, sacrifice everything in pursuit of that fountain of youth. And that's the demonic imperative, because if at any point the demonic elite slip, then karma will catch up with them very quickly. So when we're thinking about surviving on this planet and avoiding slavery, you have to recognize that most of the elites are not occultists, and they're just doing what's in their evolutionary interest. And if you're a Nietzschean, if you're a eugenicist, if you're, a kind of genetic elitist, whatever, master race believer, then you really can't object to what they're doing. You're just not in on the cut. And so you can resent it, but it's like you're not necessarily in a moral position. Like someone like Richard Spencer, is he in a moral position to really object to what's going on? No. So, yeah, that's most of the elite. The other part of the elite are the occultists, who need to put us in a slavery system in order to forestall their own eventual judgment and damnation. So they have to do this. They are committed. The committed occultists, that's also, you can see it in their rituals and how they blackmail one another with secrets and things like that. They know how this works. And probably I'll have some Patreon-only videos soon talking more specifically. It's all in my system. If you watch some of the metaphysics videos and you get a grasp of what I'm talking about, you can infer this stuff for yourself. It's a logical system once you get the basics of it. But I'll explicitly spell out how demonic communication works. Somebody called me who wanted to talk about this, and I explained it to them. So I've already gone through it once, but I'll make a patron-only video describing that stuff soon. But anyway, yeah, we shouldn't not believe that the elites would want to enslave us. They've always enslaved us. Forever. And you have to start factoring that in your plans. And you have to cooperate with others very quickly. So you're either going to serve them, or you're going to serve something else. Because you're not going to make it on your own. None of us are going to make it on our own. We're going to serve some kind of collective institution that we create, and fast, or we're going to serve them for a very long time, and it's not going to be pretty. So thank you for listening.